Hi guys, will the UK look towards Europe, or does the Labour government still think it can do a deal with Trump? Liz Webster from Save British Farming, who I had the pleasure of meeting, if just briefly, on my recent trip to London, spoke here about the major problems for the UK when it comes to negotiating a trade deal with the US. Donald Trump, it seems, wants to use the round of tariffs to force countries, especially smaller ones, to the negotiating table, to extract concessions and to hell with the consequences. Liz points out here not just how lower food standards are bad for British consumers, but how it would impact trade with Europe.
Britain doesn't want lower food standards, but also if we do lower our food standards, it causes us huge problems for our trade with our biggest partner, Europe. Despite Brexit, Europe is still our biggest trade partner, especially for agricultural products. And so we really do not want an American trade deal. Trump will not sign a deal unless it includes American agricultural produce. And that means an absolute tsunami of substandard foods. They won't send us their best stuff, they're going to send us their worst stuff. Foods full of chemicals and preservatives which are banned here, using methods which are horrific to most Europeans, and we do not want that produce. So as to why Keir Starmer's government is wasting time trying to get a deal over the line with Donald Trump, when he's last week said we have to accept chlorinated chicken. Well, we're not going to accept chlorinated chicken. So the best thing this government can do is stop wasting time and start repairing our relationship with the EU and getting us back to where we belong.
Well said. I agree completely. You know, there are two things to take from this. First of all, this idea that Donald Trump has constantly talked about how Europe needs to accept American beef. And of course, what he's talking about here is hormone-treated beef, talking about chicken, chlorinated chicken. There is no demand for it, or almost no demand for it in Europe, and there's no demand for it in the United Kingdom. You know, a few people may be calling into the Nick Ferrari show disagreeing with me, but we're just talking about a few people here. The vast majority of people do not want chlorinated chicken or hormone-treated beef. The other problem is when it comes to trade. Northern Ireland is part of the single market when it comes to goods. So, as a result of the Windsor Framework, a plan to reduce, where possible, checks being carried out between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, to reduce that friction, the last thing you need is the importation of hormone-treated beef and chlorinated chicken, which are banned in the European Union. So if the UK were to do a deal which included these things, it would be decimating for agriculture in Great Britain, and it would, of course, see agriculture blocked from travelling into the single market. The UK needs to focus on the single market now. It needs to focus on doing as much as it can to reduce the friction between GB and Northern Ireland, to reduce the friction between the UK and Europe. This should be the goal. Now, I'm not saying that a deal can't be done, but it has to be on things that are unrelated to agriculture and goods. The UK can do a deal when it comes to services, for example, or do a deal on security, but it can't when it comes to agriculture, comes to food. This is so important. You know, it's not good for British consumers, it's not good for public health, and it's not good for trade. So it shouldn't be on the table. And Donald Trump and his administration keep talking about putting it on the table. It's not just with the UK, but they also want it on the table when it comes to a deal with the European Union. They want to strong-arm the EU into accepting these things. And Europe has said no to hormone-treated beef and chlorinated chicken. Farmers in Europe do not want this. Consumers in Europe do not want it. So I don't see it happening with the European Union and the US. And this is why it's important for Starmer and the Labour government to stand up to Trump, especially on these things. Once again, perhaps it's possible to do a deal on services, on financial products, stuff like that, but not when it comes to food. This is so fundamental.